always prided herself on her small bakery, tucked in a corner of the quiet town. The comforting scent of freshly baked bread and pastries was a hallmark of her mornings, an inviting atmosphere for those who sought warmth, and a delicious bite to start their day. But lately, something had been disturbing the peaceful flow of her mornings. It began subtly, small scraps of bread, or an occasional pastry missing from the display counter. At first, she had chalked it up to a mistake, maybe a distracted employee or a mishap with packaging. But as the days wore on, Lena noticed a pattern. Each morning, the missing food was never far from the corner near the back door, and it was always food that could easily be grabbed in a hurry. That's when she started to suspect something more unusual. The bakery, a cozy place known for its loyal customers, now felt like a stage for something she couldn't quite figure out. She was about to find out that it wasn't an employee mistake at all. One crisp autumn morning, as the sun was just rising, she spotted a flash of movement through the small window at the back of the shop. A scruffy dog with patchy fur was darting around the corner, its eyes gleaming with a mix of hunger and urgency. She had seen this dog before, wandering the streets outside her shop, but never up close. It was a stray, ragged, and clearly living a tough life. Lena froze for a moment, watching as the dog carefully approached the food counter. Without hesitation, it grabbed a half loaf of bread and darted away, its paws light against the cold concrete. Lena's heart dropped. She had heard stories of stray dogs begging for food, but she had never seen one so bold or so desperate. The fact that it was taking food from her store, the very food she worked so hard to make perfect, felt personal. But there was something more to this dog, something beyond the hunger in its eyes. Lena didn't act immediately, standing behind the counter, a mixture of frustration and sympathy bubbling within her. She needed answers. Why was this dog so determined to steal from her bakery every morning? What could drive an animal to such lengths? Her curiosity got the better of her, and instead of calling animal control or chasing the dog away, she grabbed her coat and followed it. She stepped quietly out the back door, trying to keep her presence unnoticed. The dog was surprisingly quick, weaving through the alleyways, its body hunched with caution. Lena kept a safe distance, watching the way it moved, its tail barely wagging and its posture tense. The dog didn't seem to be acting out of mischief. There was a deeper need driving its every step. Lena's breath clouded in the cool morning air as she walked a few yards behind. Her eyes locked on the small, dirty creature ahead. It led her through the familiar streets of the town, a path she knew well. But the dog's destination was anything but familiar. After several minutes, they arrived at an old, dilapidated house at the edge of town, one that had long been abandoned. The windows were shattered, and the yard was overgrown with weeds and wild plants. But there, under the sagging porch, the dog disappeared into the shadows. Lena hesitated for a moment. Something about the place felt eerie, but her concern for the dog pushed her forward. She crept closer to the house, her heart pounding with a mix of fear and anticipation. As she reached the base of the porch, she crouched down, careful not to make a sound, and peeked through the gap between the rotting boards. What she saw made her blood run cold. The dog, having dropped the bread, was now nudging something, or rather, someone, with its nose. Lena's breath caught in her throat as she saw a small, frail figure huddled on the ground, wrapped in a tattered blanket. At first, she thought it might be a child, but as her eyes adjusted to the dim light, she realized it was an elderly woman, her face pale and weathered, her body thin and frail from years of neglect. The woman's eyes were closed, and her breathing was shallow. The dog, looking back and forth between the food and the woman, seemed to be trying to get her attention. It was then that Lena understood. This wasn't a mere stray dog. This was a dog doing everything it could to protect and provide for someone who needed help. Someone who could no longer fend for herself. The dog wasn't stealing the food for its own survival. It was bringing it to someone who couldn't go out and get it for herself. Lena's eyes welled up with tears as she watched the tender interaction between the two. The dog, despite its rough exterior, was showing more love and devotion than most people she knew. It wasn't just a stray. It was a guardian, a protector, and a lifeline for this elderly woman. Her heart ached for the woman, for the life she must have led, and for the bond between the two unlikely companions. Lena stood frozen, unsure of what to do next. She had witnessed something truly heartbreaking. The woman, vulnerable and alone, had found solace in the most unexpected of places, the loyalty of a stray dog. She knew she couldn't just leave them like this. Without thinking, Lena hurried back to her bakery, grabbed a large bag of food, and returned to the house. The dog, sensing her return, barked quietly in greeting, but didn't move away from the woman. Lena knelt beside the woman, gently shaking her shoulder. The woman's eyes fluttered open, and her expression was one of confusion and surprise. But when she saw Lena, something in her face softened. "I don't know who you are," the woman whispered, her voice raspy. "But you found my protector, haven't you?" Lena nodded, her throat tight with emotion. "Yes," she whispered back, "and I think you both need some help." Lena carefully helped the woman to her feet, the dog by her side, never leaving her. Together, they walked back to Lena's bakery, where she would provide the woman with a warm meal, shelter, and kindness that she had been deprived of for far too long. It was then that Lena realized how much this stray dog had already given. It had given without hesitation, without expectation, and had formed a bond with a human who had no one else. The dog had stolen food from her bakery, yes, but it had also brought her a new purpose, to help someone in need, and to see the love that could flourish in the most unexpected of places. As the days went by, Lena continued to care for the woman and the dog. They became a part of her life, a reminder that kindness could come from the most unlikely sources, and in return, the dog gave her something she hadn't expected, a lesson in loyalty, in love, and in the way that bonds are formed not by blood, but by the willingness to care for another soul, whether they were human or animal. As for the woman, she slowly regained her strength, and together, the three of them, Lena, the elderly woman, and the stray dog, became an inseparable family, united not by shared history, but by the love and compassion they had found in one another. As the days passed, the bakery began to feel different. The comforting warmth of the oven, once solely a place for baked goods, now seemed to carry with it the weight of something more significant. Lena had never imagined that a stray dog and an elderly woman would become the very heart of her business. Yet, here they were, transforming her days, filling the empty corners of the bakery with a joy that she hadn't known she was missing. The dog, whom she had begun to call Patch, had a quiet but powerful presence. Despite his rough appearance, his once shaggy fur now had a healthy shine, and his eyes, which had once been clouded with hunger and uncertainty, were clear and full of life. He spent his days lying on the bakery's floor, keeping a watchful eye over Lena and the woman who had introduced herself as Margery. Margery, despite her frailty, had an unmistakable strength about her. She had lived a life of hardship and solitude, but there was an undeniable wisdom in her eyes, a deep well of stories she had yet to share. When she first arrived at Lena's bakery, she was almost too proud to accept help. Her fingers were stiff, her body weak, and her spirit seemed just as fragile. But Patch, who had never left her side, seemed to know what was best. He guided her through the first few weeks of her new life, with each passing day strengthening the bond between them. Margery would sit by the window, her face softening as she watched Patch roam around the bakery, greeting the customers with a quiet, gentle demeanor. Lena had never realized how much a dog could change the energy of a place. Where once the bakery had been quiet, now there was an undercurrent of joy. The patrons who stopped by each morning seemed to linger a little longer, sharing stories about their own pets or commenting on how much Patch had changed. Some even brought treats for the dog, and he accepted them graciously, his tail wagging in thanks. But it was clear that the bond between the dog and Margery was something much deeper. It wasn't just companionship, it was survival. In the weeks that followed, Margery began to open up to Lena, telling her bits and pieces of her life. She spoke of her youth, of a time when she had lived with her family in a small house on the outskirts of town. She had been married once to a man who loved her dearly, but that was a long time ago. Over time, she had lost everything: her husband, her home, and eventually her ability to care for herself. She had become an invisible part of society, someone whom people would pass by without a second thought. The way Margery described it, it wasn't a single event that had led her to this point. Rather, it had been a slow unraveling, a life that had slowly fallen apart, thread by thread. The loneliness had been the hardest to bear, but then, just when Margery thought she couldn't go on any longer, she had found Patch. He had appeared one chilly evening, as though guided by fate. He had been as lost as she was, and together they had formed an unspoken pact. He had saved her, and in turn, she had saved him. Their bond was forged in the fires of survival, and it was unbreakable. As Margery told Lena her story, Patch lay by her side, his head resting on her lap, as if listening attentively. There was something deeply comforting about the way the dog seemed to understand every word. Lena couldn't help but feel that Patch had known exactly what Margery needed from the very beginning. He had been her protector long before anyone else had noticed, long before Lena had stepped into the picture. The bakery, once a solitary place for Lena, now felt like a gathering point for those who needed a little extra warmth, a little extra kindness. People who had never spoken to her before would come in, struck by the gentle presence of Patch and the quiet serenity that had begun to fill the space. They would sit at the tables, sipping coffee and watching the dog interact with the world around him. They would ask about the woman in the corner, and Lena would smile, proud to share the story of Margery and Patch. It wasn't long before Margery's health began to improve. She no longer needed help to walk, and her strength slowly returned, though it was clear she would never be the woman she had once been. But it didn't matter. She had Patch, and he had her. They were a team, and nothing else seemed to matter. It was one afternoon, as Lena was cleaning up the bakery, when she received an unexpected visitor. A man, dressed in a dark suit, entered the shop, his eyes scanning the room as he approached the counter. He seemed out of place in the cozy bakery, and Lena couldn't help but feel a flicker of unease. "Good afternoon," he said in a deep voice. "Are you Lena?" "Yes, I am," she replied, wiping her hands on her apron. "Can I help you with something?" The man hesitated for a moment before continuing. "I'm from the local shelter," he said, his tone more businesslike now. "We've been tracking a stray dog that's been going around the area. We've noticed that it's been getting food from your bakery." Lena felt her heart skip a beat. She knew exactly who he was talking about. "Patch," she said softly. "He's not a stray," the man insisted, his eyes narrowing. "He's a problem dog. We've been trying to catch him, but he's been elusive. We've had complaints about him scavenging food from local businesses." Lena's stomach churned. "What are you suggesting?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. "I'm just here to make sure the situation doesn't get out of hand," the man said, his tone more forceful now. "We need to take the dog into the shelter. He's causing a disruption, and we can't allow this kind of behavior to continue." Lena's mind raced. She couldn't imagine Patch being taken away, especially not after everything he had done for Margery. She glanced at the elderly woman sitting by the window, her eyes focused on Patch, and her heart ached. She knew what she had to do. Without another word, Lena turned and walked toward the back of the bakery, where Patch lay on the floor. He looked up at her with those wise, knowing eyes. "I'm not letting them take you," Lena whispered, her voice filled with conviction. Patch's tail wagged slowly, and for the first time, Lena realized how much he had come to mean to her, too. He wasn't just a stray dog. He was a symbol of something greater, of love, of loyalty, of the deep connection that exists between humans and animals. She walked back to the man and, without hesitation, spoke the words that would change everything. "I won't give him up," she said firmly, her eyes locked on the man's. The man didn't respond immediately, his expression one of surprise. But there was something about the way Lena spoke, something about the bond between her and Patch that made him hesitate. After a long pause, the man sighed. "I'll have to report this," he said, "but it's your decision." He turned and left the bakery, his footsteps echoing as he disappeared into the streets. Lena stood there, her heart still racing, but she knew she had made the right choice. Patch was more than a stray dog. He was part of her family now. And he was part of Margery's family too. Together, they would face whatever challenges came their way, because no one was going to separate them. The days that followed the confrontation with the shelter worker seemed to carry a new weight. Lena could feel the change in the bakery. No longer was it simply a place of flour and sugar, but a sanctuary, a haven for all those who sought warmth, both physical and emotional. The decision to protect Patch, to stand against the shelter's orders, wasn't easy. But Lena knew it was the right one. Patch, with his gentle eyes and silent loyalty, had transformed her life in ways she hadn't expected. And she wasn't about to let him be torn from the family they had quietly built. Margery, too, had felt the shift. The two women, once strangers to each other, had grown close over the weeks, united by their shared love for Patch. Each morning, Margery would arrive at the bakery early, her frail body supported by the sturdy arms of her beloved dog. Together, they would sit by the window, watching the world go by, while the scent of freshly baked bread filled the air. The bond between them was undeniable. Lena had learned so much from Margery about resilience, about love that never fades, about the quiet strength that resides in the heart of every soul, no matter how weathered by time. As for Patch, he had become the heart of the bakery. The customers, who had once been strangers, now greeted him by name, and many had begun to share their own stories with Lena, stories of their pets, of lost companions, and of the unconditional love that only an animal can give. Each day, more people came to the bakery, not just for the pastries, but to sit with Patch, to pet his soft fur, and listen to the calming presence he brought. The bakery was no longer just a place to buy bread. It had become a community center, a place where people could find comfort and companionship. Still, there was a lingering worry in Lena's heart. The shelter had not forgotten Patch. She knew that, sooner or later, they would come back for him, but for now, the days felt peaceful. Patch had become a symbol of hope, of loyalty, of the connection between humans and animals that transcends all barriers. But even the quietest days can bring unexpected challenges. One chilly morning, as Lena prepared the dough for the day's batch of croissants, she saw a familiar figure approach the bakery window. The shelter worker, the man who had come to take Patch, stood outside, his arms crossed, his face unreadable. Lena's heart skipped a beat. She knew that this was it. This was the moment she had feared. He hadn't come alone. Behind him stood two officers, their faces stern, their posture rigid. Lena's mind raced. She couldn't let them take Patch. She wouldn't. The thought of losing him, of seeing him torn from Margery's side, sent a surge of panic through her chest. But even in the face of fear, Lena felt a calmness settle within her. She walked to the door, taking a deep breath before opening it. The cold air hit her face, but it didn't deter her. She stood tall, her back straight, and met the man's gaze. "You're not taking him," she said, her voice steady but firm. The shelter worker sighed, his face a mask of indifference. "Lena, we've been patient," he said, his tone attempting to sound reasonable. "But this is a matter of protocol. We can't just let a dog run loose, especially one that's been causing problems." "He's not causing problems," Lena replied, her voice rising slightly. "Patch is a good dog. He's not a threat, and he's not going anywhere." The officers stepped forward, but the shelter worker raised a hand to stop them. "I don't want to cause trouble," he said, his tone softer now. "But you have to understand, Lena. This is our job. We have to follow the rules." Lena's mind raced as she searched for a way out of this situation. But then, a voice broke through the tension. It was Margery, her frail figure standing at the back of the bakery, Patch by her side. "Lena," she said softly, her voice shaking. "Lena, don't fight them." The words struck Lena like a bolt of lightning. Margery's eyes were filled with pain, but also with acceptance. "He's not ours to keep," Margery continued, her voice thick with emotion. Patch has always been his own. He's been there for me when I had nothing. And now he's there for you. But maybe it's time for him to go." Lena felt a lump form in her throat. She couldn't imagine a life without Patch, couldn't bear the thought of him leaving. But as she looked at Margery, she saw the depth of the woman's love for the dog, and it became clear. Margery was letting go. She had lived a lifetime of loss, and now, with Patch, she had found a love that healed her. But she knew, just as Lena did, that sometimes love means knowing when to say goodbye. Patch had been a stray once, a lost soul wandering the streets, and Margery had found him, cared for him, and nurtured him back to health. But there were some things that even love couldn't control. Patch had given them both everything he had, and now it was time for him to follow his own path. Lena walked over to Margery, placing a hand gently on her shoulder. "I'm not ready to let him go," she whispered. Margery smiled softly, her eyes filled with tears. "I know, dear, but but he's been a part of my life for so long. It's time for him to find his own way now. Patch, as if sensing the sadness in the air, walked over to Margery and nudged her hand gently. His eyes were soft, his gaze full of understanding, as though he knew the difficult decision that had been made. He turned toward Lena, his tail wagging slowly, and then, to everyone's surprise, he sat down in front of the shelter workers, as though acknowledging them for the first time. It was as if he had known all along that this day would come. With a final look at Lena and Margery, Patch stood up and walked toward the officers, his head held high, his step sure. There was no resistance, no hesitation. He was ready. The shelter worker knelt down, and Patch allowed him to place a leash around his neck, a quiet surrender. The officers nodded to Lena and Margery, but there was no need for words. The dog had chosen his path, and the decision had been made. The bakery was silent for a moment, as if the very walls were mourning the loss of the dog who had brought so much light into it. But as the door closed behind the shelter workers and Patch, Lena and Margery remained in their quiet grief. They had loved him, and now they had to let him go. Margery, ever the stoic woman, wiped her eyes and turned to Lena. "He'll be okay," she said, her voice filled with a quiet strength. "Patch is a survivor. He always has been." Lena nodded, though her heart ached. "I'll miss him," she whispered. But Margery smiled, a soft, knowing smile. "He'll never be far from us," she said. "He'll always be with us, in here." She placed a hand on her heart, and Lena did the same. They stood there together, in the bakery that had become their home, their sanctuary. It wasn't the end, Lena realized. It was a new beginning. They had been given the gift of Patch's love, and no matter where he went, that love would never fade. The door to the bakery opened once more, and the familiar faces of the regular customers appeared, looking for their morning bread, their pastries, and the warmth of the bakery that had come to mean so much to them. Lena smiled, wiping away the last of her tears, knowing that Patch's story, their story, would continue to live on. And as for Margery, she sat by the window once again, a quiet peace settling over her as she watched the world go by, knowing that love, even when it has to let go, is never truly lost.